Have you ever looked at some companies and wondered how they just seem to print money while others are in this constant, brutal fight just to stay afloat? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that. We're going to use this really powerful framework to see what's really going on under the hood of an industry. Let's get into it.
I mean, this is the big question in business strategy, right? Is it just dumb luck? Are some managers just geniuses? Or are there deeper, kind of hidden forces at play that decide who's going to win and who's going to lose before the game even starts?
Okay, think about this for a second. The soft drink industry. For decades, they've made fantastic profits. But then you look at the airline industry. I mean, it's essential to how the world works, but it's famous for razor-thin margins and, constant bankruptcies. The real difference isn't just planes versus soda. It's the entire structure of their industries.
So, to solve this puzzle, we're going to turn to a legend in business strategy, Michael Porter. Back in 1979, he gave us this incredible lens to see way beyond just the obvious competitors. His 5 forces framework shows us the underlying pressures that really dictate how attractive an industry is. If the forces are super intense, like they are for airlines, profits get squeezed. But if they're mild, well, there's a lot more room for everyone to do well.
All right, let's dive into the first force, and it's the one we all think of first, the head-to-head fight between the companies that are already there. This is all about just how fierce that battle for customers really is.
So here's the thing you have to get. Rivalry isn't just about a few aggressive CEOs. It's driven by these very specific conditions. So when you've got a ton of companies all about the same size, fighting over a pie that isn't really growing, and customers don't see much difference between them, what happens? It's a race to the bottom on price wars. And then you add high exit barriers, like massive investments you can't get back, that traps companies in the fight, forcing them to compete even when they're losing money.
And boom, that's the airline industry in a nutshell. It is crowded, the market isn't growing like crazy, and let's be honest, for most of us, a seat on one plane is pretty much the same as a seat on another. Throw in the insane cost of the airplanes themselves, and you've just cooked up a recipe for this relentless, profit-killing rivalry.
Okay, next up, the threat of newcomers. The best way to think about this is to imagine huge walls around an industry. Are those walls low enough for just anyone to hop over? Or is it like a massive fortress protecting all the companies that are already inside?
And those walls, they're what we call barriers to entry. They can be all sorts of things like needing billions of dollars for factories or planes, or having to navigate a crazy maze of government regulations. Or, just overcoming the decades of experience and brand trust that the big players have already built up. The higher those barriers, the safer and usually the more profitable the companies inside are.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Because on one hand, starting an airline takes a staggering amount of cash for planes and licenses and getting access to flight routes. That keeps most people out. But on the other hand, things like aircraft leasing and these super innovative cost-cutting business models, well, they allowed low-cost carriers like Ryanair and EasyJet to find a crack in that fortress, and they completely shook up the industry. So that threat is always kind of lurking.
Okay, let's keep building this picture with the next force. See, a company can't operate in a vacuum. It needs to buy stuff, inputs. This force looks at how much power the suppliers of those inputs have to jack up their prices and basically suck the profit right out of an industry before the companies even get a taste.
I mean, just look at this. If you are an airline and you need to buy a big commercial jet, you've got 2 phone numbers you can call, Boeing or Airbus. That's it. It's a duopoly. And that gives them immense power over the airlines. When you have very few suppliers and no other options, they're the ones holding all the cards.
So the verdict here is pretty clear. You've got the aircraft duopoly on one side, and on the other, airlines are totally dependent on aviation fuel, a product whose price is set by these wild swings in global geopolitics. The suppliers have enormous power. They can raise their prices, and the airlines, they don't have much choice but to pay up, which just squeezes their margins even more.
Okay, now let's flip the script and look at the other side of the deal. Us, the customers, the buyers. How much muscle do we have to demand lower prices, better quality, more services?
Think about it. Before the internet, trying to compare flight prices was a huge pain. Now, it takes what, 10 seconds? Price comparison sites like Skyscanner or Expedia have put all the power right in the hands of the consumer. When you can see every price and it costs you absolutely nothing to switch from one airline to another for that flight to LA, you're always going to pick the cheapest one.
Exactly.
Because we, the buyers, can compare and switch so easy, brand loyalty is incredibly low. Most people will happily fly a different airline just to save a few bucks. Sure, frequent flyer programs try to fight this, but the basic power dynamic has shifted. It's a buyer's market, and that keeps constant pressure on the airlines to lower their fares.
All right, this last force is maybe the most subtle one. A substitute isn't a direct competitor. It's a totally different product or service that solves the same basic problem. So think of it like coffee versus an energy drink. They're not the same thing, but they both satisfy that need for a caffeine kick.
So for an airline, the basic job they do is getting you from point A to point B. And there are actually plenty of substitutes for that. For shorter trips, you could drive your car or hop on a train. For medium distances, high-speed rail is a huge competitor, especially in places like Europe and Asia. And who knows what's next? Concepts like the Hyperloop could be a whole new way to travel.
And that's the key. A train might not be a substitute for flying across the Atlantic, but for a trip from DC to New York? Absolutely. This threat of substitution basically puts a price ceiling on what airlines can charge. If their flights get too expensive, people will just find another way to get there.
So we've looked at each force one by one, but the real magic of this framework happens when you put it all together. It's the combined pressure from all 5 of these forces that really tells you the story of an industry's profit potential.
And for the airline industry, this is the big aha moment. Just look at this scorecard. You've got intense rivalry, suppliers with a ton of power, buyers with a ton of power, and a pretty big threat from substitutes. 4 out of the 5 forces are just hammering the airlines. This is why, structurally, it is so incredibly hard to make a consistent, healthy profit in that business.
But here's the most important part. Porter's 5 forces isn't just for diagnosing a problem and feeling bad about it. Its real value is helping you build a strategy. You're not just a victim of these forces. You can actually try to influence them.
And this is where the theory turns into action. For instance, because airlines knew buyer power was high, what did they do? They created frequent flyer programs to try and lock us in. Facing those powerful aircraft suppliers, they started leasing planes to lower their huge upfront costs. The goal isn't just to understand the game, it's to find clever ways to change the rules in your favor.
And that really brings us to the core idea here. This framework is an amazing tool, and not just for CEOs, but for anyone who just wants to understand the business world a little better. So ask yourself, in the industry where you work, or even for the stuff you buy every day, what are the hidden forces shaping things? Who really has the power, and where do the profits truly go?